Hi, this is Ren,
This is Casey.
and this is All Walks of Film.
Today we're talking about the new season of American Horror Story Cult.
Yeah, so when this show was announced, it was unclear what the title was because that's essentially what Ryan Murphy wants to do every season. I did hear early on that it was going to be in some ways about the 2016 election, which has been a subject of contention for a little bit over a year now, and is still a subject of contention that will probably last until 2020 and possibly even till 2024.
Depending on how long legal proceedings go on for as well.
Yeah. So I wasn't really sure what this season was going to bring. Like, I wasn't sure if this was actually going to be about things leading up to the 2016 election, kind of like a mesh between American Horror Story and American Crime Story.
Yeah.
Which, to a certain extent, there's still some elements where they're trying to fuse the two, with the cultural relevance. But this is American Horror Story, so it doesn't have the sophistication that, American Crime Story had, which, if that name sounds strange to you, The People vs. O.J. Simpson was essentially the first season of that.
Yeah.
The second season is supposed to be about Katrina, but there's some legal battle going on with that season, so I don't know when it's coming out. So, we have this.
And I will say I haven't seen two seasons. I haven't seen the first one and the third one, and I'm not watching the third one. Just I'm not gonna bother. But the second season, I think, is almost a perfect season. Like, I think Asylum was exceptional. I mean, enough to get me to keep watching the damn thing. But I think an ongoing problem that American Horror Story has had in season 4, 5, and 6 is they're very unfocused. They sort of throw everything at the wall and try to see what sticks. They bring all of their A-game material at the beginning of the season, and everything just fizzles out. And it's not like, across the board, everything at the beginning is great and everything at the end is crap. There are always good moments and bad moments. But just as a general vibe, they always have like certain potential and like a couple meager attempts at some sort of social commentary, particularly in American Horror Story Roanoke, that I feel like they never really fully realize or get into. I have so many problems with the way that the show handles itself season in and season out. And based on that idea from the previous 3 seasons, the past 3 years, with Freak Show, Hotel, and Roanoke, I am really dreading the rest of the season because this episode was a mess. It was a train wreck. It was such a disaster in terms of trying to express any sort of idea or coherent message. It's just really obnoxious to watch. It's some of the worst writing they've ever had on the program. Ever. And if this is, like I said, based off of previous seasons, if this is their A-game material, oh dear God. Oh. I mean, to be fair, at least we're not listening to Sarah Paulson try to pull off, like, a ridiculously stupid English accent again. Helps a little bit.
Yeah, that was pretty insufferable.
Yeah, I don't know why they did that.
Yeah, it seems like they really ran out of ideas, and they're still, even though the show is still popular, so they're trying to keep it going, but it just seems like they need to add new blood into the writing team.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that does make this really insufferable is that there's such a paper-thin allegory to it. It is entirely, explicitly about the election. It's about, Trump is such a monster. Trump supporters are such monsters. And the only, like, quote-unquote metaphor is the fact that Trump supporters are represented by clowns. Which, I'm going to take a moment to say, like, I think that the whole, not personal phobia of clowns, but the phenomenon in media of the scary clown is more than a little bit ridiculous. I think it's just silly.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is capitalizing off of the new rendition of It coming out.
Right, the love of the original It, the new It coming out, but then there were the clown sightings that were happening kind of around the same time, and they're trying to put those two things together. I guess it's just, that's not interesting. That's really my biggest problem with the show. They're not saying anything. I think that it's a little ridiculous that in the entire show, they were only able to say 2 negative things about Trump. Like, Trump's administration. Well, this kind of leads into the bigger problem with the show. On your show, where you're trying to, talk about a family that's terrified of the Trump administration, because that's what it is. Sarah Paulson's character has a lot of phobias, including a clown phobia, and it's being manifested by seeing Trump supporters as clowns, because since the election, her phobias have become a lot more difficult for her to handle, and she's been having a lot more anxiety, she's been having hallucinations. But at the center of it, you're trying to talk about a family that's scared about what's going to happen with this new administration.
Yeah, and it's obviously allegorical to the feeling that many Americans have about this new administration and this unsettling fear that a lot of people have for various reasons.
Right, and to be fair, this is only based on episode 1. This could go different places, but right now, just looking at episode 1, a big problem is that you specifically chose to have a family of white privileged people to be scared of the Trump administration. I think that's more than a little bit ridiculous, because they are a lesbian couple, and they're trying to talk about how, like, oh, we're scared that they're going to overturn gay marriage. And they say, oh, our housekeeper just up and left, and we don't know what happened. Not that they, like, tried to make the housekeeper, like, a real person or anything before that.
Yeah, did they even refer to her by name?
No, I mean, I don't think so, but she was also only in one shot in the whole episode before she was potentially deported or ran away or whatever happened. We don't even know. But, like, that's ridiculous. Like, that's just, like, such a dehumanizing way to look at, the political problems that you're attempting to address. One thing, too, like, that's been a big problem with the Trump administration is education, the educational system. And they have a child, but that's not something that, it may come into play, but right now, not even addressed. So far all we've heard is something might have happened to the housekeeper, but we don't know, and she's not even a person, so who cares? And one girl seriously says, if I got pregnant, where would I have an abortion now? Which, the way that they frame it in, like, such a cavalier kind of way is insulting. Not that that's not a serious issue to think about, but, like, it really makes people who are pro-choice and want to defend women's right to choose look ridiculous. And really mean-spirited, I should say. Besides that, there's nothing to address the problems with the Trump administration. At all. There's been so far nothing that's really talking about the problems with the election. All of the rigging that happened on both sides, a lot of the legal problems, a lot of the, like, way that there was a lot of manipulation to get the candidates that we got. Nothing like that. And on both sides. And a lot of it is not really talking about Hillary Clinton. There's one point where Sarah Paulson's character is like, well, I didn't feel right voting for her. She didn't campaign in the states where she needed to. which is true, but they don't talk about anything else with that. They seriously went an entire episode without mentioning Bernie Sanders at all. But they do bring up Jill Stein quite a bit, because it takes place in Michigan, and supposedly 10,000 people voted for Jill Stein, and that cost Hillary Clinton the Michigan state, the state of Michigan, whatever. And that's apparently who Sarah Paulson voted for. And that becomes like, seriously, kind of like the big bad. It's all Jill Stein's fault that we have Trump, which is, if you haven't heard yet, one of the most ridiculous accusations that has been made surrounding the 2016 elections. Because, first of all, far more Democrats voted for Trump than for Jill Stein and Gary Johnson put together. Just putting that out there. But second of all, this is the whole problem when you have people on the quote-unquote left who blame voters for voting for the candidate that they want to vote for. Because there are a lot of problems with this election, mostly surrounding the fact that the votes didn't matter. There were tons of examples of people getting provisional ballots when they shouldn't have been getting provisional ballots, people being thrown out of voting places and not being allowed to vote, people who had their ballots torn up or thrown away or had their votes erased. A lot of that happened. A lot of stuff with legal loopholes and superdelegates. So then when, they couldn't get rid of people's votes, well, we're just going to have somebody who you guys didn't vote for. And, newsflash, Trump did not win the popular vote. But when you specifically, in a supposed democracy, we don't have a democracy, but supposed democracy, you want to turn around and point your fingers at the voters, how dare you vote for somebody? That's not the way it works. Even if you hate Trump supporters for supporting Trump, there is, and this is really hard for me to say, this is not something I'm saying lightly, but there's nothing inherently wrong with voting for the person you want to vote for. But if you're specifically saying, hey, Bernie Sanders shouldn't have tried to campaign against Hillary Clinton, Jill Stein shouldn't have tried to campaign against Hillary Clinton, well, first of all, that makes Clinton look weak. It's a little ridiculous to be like, she should just be unopposed. How dare anybody else try to run, even if they're running in a separate party? That's just fucking ridiculous. But also, if people are not voting for Hillary Clinton, and they are liberals, very specifically, if you're pointing at people who are not interested in voting for Trump, who are not interested in voting Republican, who don't have any intention of doing that, and they're voting more to the left, which has become more and more and more popular, why are you not taking notes about, well, what is Bernie Sanders doing that is taking votes away from Hillary Clinton? What is Jill Stein doing that's taking votes away from Hillary Clinton? Why isn't the Democratic Party in general moving more towards the left, adopting more populist issues that people are willing to vote for, instead of saying, oh, you care about Black Lives Matter, you care about Standing Rock, you care about clean water, you care about green energy, you care about jobs, you care about the $15 minimum wage, you care about tuition-free college, you care about, fair representation in a supposed, again, democracy. You care about getting money out of politics. Fuck you. How dare you vote for another candidate who embodies what you want out of your politicians?
Yeah.
You should know better.
It seems like the whole sort of cursing people who voted outside of the political spectrum of Democrat or Republican, there's so many people in society that basically vilify them, saying that, well, you have to pick the lesser of two evils, which I would say you should pick the candidate that you feel would best be president. So if any of those and I know that people think strategy and all this kind of stuff, and I get that I get that argument. However, we should at least try to have a democracy instead of have this polar... yeah, I know, that's hilarious.
No,
but
it is just especially hilarious considering that the Republican Party and the Democratic Party know, and we have proof that they know and are completely okay with this, that we do not live in a democracy. And it's hard to point to a time where we really did. Let's be honest.
And also, let's be honest that most of the people who voted for Donald Trump were not Trump supporters, as many of them are claimed to be. Most of them voted either because they didn't like or trust Hillary Clinton, and in some cases, their party, what do you call that? Party voters. Who,
right, they just voted for the Republican candidate.
Yeah, and there are plenty of people like that. I don't really see how the Christian right were really supportive of him because, I mean, let's face it, I mean, you could just start listing down all the stuff that goes against, like, conservative religion, but, you know, conservatives are hypocrites often.
Mm-hmm, that's true. Well, and the other thing that a lot of Trump supporters who are publicly, you know, in articles and in news segments, specifically saying, like, I regret voting for Trump. I wish I didn't. I'm not a Trump supporter. I think his administration is blowing everything up, but I'm not okay with it. A lot of them are saying things like, well, between Trump and Hillary, Trump was talking about blue-collar workers. Trump was talking about keeping jobs. Trump was talking about, you know, healthcare benefits and things like that. And not that he was even talking about it well, by the way. Not like he had the best policy on this subject or even necessarily like I believed in his messages. They're more talking about he's the only one I heard saying anything at all, which is insane and pathetic. You know, and I think even a lot of these people were like, well, not like I thought he would do a good job, but I thought he might try. I didn't think Hillary Clinton would try because she didn't talk about it. She doesn't talk about policy in most of her campaigning.
Yeah, and getting back to the show,
yes, because here's the thing.
You can't take this away from politics because
all
it's
about
right.
Politics.
Exactly.
Yes.
So, like, if you're like listening to this and going like, "Why are you talking about this?"
Because that's literally what the show's about. But here's the problem: everything that we're talking about is not addressed in any way on the show, and it doesn't look like it's going to be. What happens on the show is you see wealthy, privileged people screaming at their television and crying because their candidate didn't win. And you see poor people being demented, humping their television screen, putting Cheetos in a blender and rubbing it all over their face, which reminds me so much of the girl with the Martin Luther King Day video with the peanut butter and Oreos. Oh god, that was so horrible. But to be honest, that video at least is more insane than what they're showing on American Horror Story. Like, they can't even be more outrageous than real life, which is kind of what kills me about this episode. And like peeing in the condoms. You know, it's stupid things that aren't saying, they're not contributing to the conversation, and they're also not exactly helping the show create an identity. They're not helping develop the characters. They're not helping the show form an argument about politics. It's just, oh, boo-hoo, Trump won. Oh my god, the poor, white, PBR drinking Trump supporters are all insane. Yeah. End of story. Like, well, is it going to be like that for a whole fucking season? How many times do you need to hear that?
As far as the pee thing goes, like, I don't want to...
To be fair, that was possibly the best part of the episode.
I don't want to misrepresent one group as doing it more, but in most cases about urine being thrown, I've heard it's coming from the extreme left. And I don't want to even call them like the alt left or like whatever. It's the extreme left. It's sort of like this militant left. Sometimes they follow Antifa. Sometimes they, do different things. But like one thing that has been common of them is they have thrown bottles of piss at the police, as well as like neo-Nazis and that kind of stuff. So
why is this like an actual social issue? Throwing urine, like really? Oh my god!
Well, I mean, in basic terms, it's sort of like chemical warfare, even though, like, obviously it's not too dangerous doing it. Like, there's still some risks, and it's gross and all that kind of stuff. It's sort of...
And it also depends on who's, like, the health status of the person whose piss that is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that is a bodily fluid, I mean.
But I do think that the show is getting at this whole idea of, with an enhanced political climate, people are going crazy. So it's possible that Evan Peters' character, who's possibly the most interesting character in the show, I did kind of find it weird that not being somebody who, like, is in any way like a Trump supporter or anything like that, but I was kind of drawn to him just because of his performance kind of drew me in to this sort of mentality of, just kind of Joker-esque, just trying to provoke things out of people, which I think a lot of Trump, quote unquote, Trump supporters, I don't mean like the hardcore ones, I think a lot of people are trolls who like support it. When liberal people get really angry and frustrated and all that kind of stuff, what's the funniest thing they can do? Say they're a Trump supporter, and it will just set them wild. And I see the show as addressing how people take the bait.
Well, and with his character specifically, he had this whole thing about let the revolution begin or something like that, where he's clearly more in support of Trump in order to upset the status quo. He's also in support of, racist policies and that kind of stuff. And you see much better manifestations of that aspect through his character than like Sarah Paulson's family or any of that kind of storyline.
Yeah, I think if you were going to talk about what's the best allegory in the show, he's definitely the best the show has to offer right now.
But it's also literally just because he can't give a bad performance, as far as I know.
He was okay in season 3. He was just like Frankenstein boy, but that season was...
I didn't see that season, so I'm not sure. But in every season I've seen, he's always been phenomenal and occasionally the only decent thing on the program. Like right now. Yeah.
Going back to the piss scene, because I think it's probably the most interesting scene, because like he sets it up and he sets it so that the, sorry, I'm going to use very blatant words, even though I think situations are more sophisticated than this. When he throws the piss at the Mexicans and they beat him up, it sort of enhances that idea that, oh, these crazy Mexicans are like coming in and like beating us up, which is what he's...
Specifically because he had somebody filming just that part, he provokes them.
I think he just set a camera up. I don't think he had somebody filming
that might be true.
Yeah.
That might be true. Right now we just see that it's filmed, but that's still the point. He set it up as a trap to, essentially create propaganda, saying, oh, these... I'm using quotes. This is not like my actual beliefs, obviously, but in order to send a message of like, oh, these fucking violent Mexicans who are beating up some poor innocent white boy, who's sort of a narrative. Which, like you said, I think there were 2 actually really interesting moments in the entire episode, and they were both actually about the state of media and the way that like we connect with the internet. And that's one is actually really, really prevalent, especially in today's political climate, where we get all these snippets and they're attached to like a completely different story and we see them out of context and people can take them to mean like whatever the fuck they want. And a lot of times, you can see longer cuts where you can see more evidence. But, there is such a thing in our political climate of, like, taking little bits and pieces and being like, oh, see? There you go. Like, especially when it comes to racial profiling. How many times do you hear, somebody, like an African-American man, is murdered by the police, and people on the right say, not like all people, but you see like extremists on the right who say things like, oh, well, they were a criminal, so it was totally justified. Oh, the left wants to paint them as like this hero, but they were clearly a criminal. It would, the police are just doing their job. But when you have stuff where it's like, okay, he was selling cigarettes, that means he deserved to die? Like, technically, yes, that's against the law, but, like, that's not something that you pay for with your life. That's not like he was a murderer or a child abuser or something insane like that. And also, there are a lot of times where, no, there is no criminal activity. There is nothing you point to and say, like, oh, see, look, it's so fucked up. They totally deserve that. But you take the little nuggets of information, you show them out of context, and that's something that we've been seeing a lot of attention towards fighting against, fighting against the fake news narratives and that kind of stuff, which is a noble goal. But then half the time, the articles and the videos that are trying to fight against the idea of like fake news are also propagating false information. We have the fucking, what is it, the Verit, is that it?
Yeah.
Where they're putting out fucking false information about the election under the guise of providing people with the correct information.
Well, I wouldn't say false information, but it's definitely slanted information. I think the unfortunate thing is the media is very biased, so much to the point where, like, you can't really get the full picture unless you're essentially watching both sides of the news and then like watching other countries talk about our country. Like, it gets really complicated because you essentially have to look at stuff that looks kind of BS and look at it from various different sources to try to piece together the truth. It's really hard to get the truth right now because both sides are slanting it so extremely that it's really hard to get a full idea of, the picture of like what's going on. And, from the left, you can see it as, oh, well, this and this. And like, I am a liberal, like, just so that's out there. But, I was not a fan of this current political situation. I think that there are several ways that we could have avoided it. And now that we're in it, I do not like the idea of us trying to escalate tensions, which is something that we are seeing with literal Nazis in the street, along with people who are so far extreme on the left that they are essentially provoking these people to lash out even more. I think the show is trying to get at some of that, though I don't know how effective it's actually going to be.
Yeah, that's something I've been thinking about in the days since I've seen this episode, is the episode does a really good job of making both sides seem like fucking lunatics who have no idea what the hell is actually happening in the world. Like, they make both sides look really bad. But I can't really see the show going in the direction of trying to do the South Park thing of saying, like, look, we've got bad apples on both sides, and, as long as somebody's ideas, are flawed or don't make sense or aren't good for the public, we should, point that out and fight against it, regardless of what their, label of politics is. I really can't see them doing that, especially since, like, does Sarah Paulson ever play a villain?
She did play sort of a villainous character in 12 Years a Slave.
No, I mean with American Horror Story. Like, she's always kind of on the good side. Evan Peters kind of teeters back and forth between being like a morally good character or a morally bad character.
Yeah, I think you're right.
But also, like, they try to do a lot to make it seem like she's right, she just also has mental problems that are escalating things, you know, sort of a problem. Like, that sort of a dynamic. But not that she or her partner or anything like that are wrong or have, like, bad ideals or any such thing. But as much as I dislike it in that regard, I do kind of hope that they are trying to tackle this, like, political media problem with this whole storyline with, you know, the video of the beating and see where that goes. Because that looks potentially like a more interesting, substantial storyline, I hope. That might have something to say at some point, but honestly, just for a first episode, a lot of stuff about characters were cartoonish. I hate to say, I don't even want to say cartoonish, because there are cartoon characters who are better developed than anybody on this program right now.
But I think that's an accurate word.
Where it's just, like, not even close to reality, sort of a thing.
I will say that I do think the relationship with him and his sister is, like, interesting, but, like, at the same time, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, because it was clear at the very beginning of the episode that she was a very staunch Hillary supporter, but as the episode kind of played out, I couldn't tell, like, what her motives were, you know, because it seemed to contradict everything that we had seen before, which, you know, might be something interesting, you know, with the whole becoming a babysitter and...
Right, because she's kind of in cahoots with her brother, so, like, it could be that she was lying about spending all those hours supporting Hillary Clinton, but you see her, you know, like, pretty candid emotional response to Trump winning and how bad it was, and she was the one who had the line about, like, if I got pregnant tomorrow, where would I get my abortion, you know? And it's not like anyone was around to see that, or like she was faking it, you know? So I don't really know. It's one of those things where it's like, maybe they'll clear it up, but right now from the first episode, it just feels all over the fucking place. But she did have the only other moment in the episode that I liked. That I think is actually, like, a really terrifying idea to try to explore. There's a scene where she's babysitting Sarah Paulson's kid, and she is showing him, like, videos of murders on the darknet. And she's just, like, showing this to this kid, and the kid's like, I can't handle this, and she's like, it's okay, you should keep watching. And I really like that concept, because that's something that can totally happen. You know, that was how I was exposed to the darknet. So, you know, a guy in my class was like, hey, you want to see this video? And, you know, your friends do that all the time. You know, they're like, oh, you want to see this video? And it's like a video of a cat with a pacifier, or, you know, something from Rick and Morty or something like that. You're like, okay, sure, you know. And he's showing me a video of a beheading, like a politically motivated beheading on the darknet. And I'm like, what the you know, and he's just super nonchalant about it. It doesn't even faze him, which happens a lot. That was actually even a joke on Rick and Morty. You know, he's like, well, I don't look at the dark web because it bores me, but, you know, someone like you would be traumatized. So, like, this idea of, like, trusting your kid with someone you don't know who's gonna casually, like, show them, you know, expose them to the darknet or something like that actually does seem, like, legitimately terrifying. That seems like something that you could really play around with in, like, an American Horror Story sort of idea. And I don't know if they're going to do anything with that, especially since they seem to be a lot more focused on the whole, he likes this story about the killer clown thing. It's all about the killer clown. Oh, God.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about these clowns because according to the show, the clowns are sort of a manifestation of fear, but they don't actually exist. Or do they?
Well, Twisty's back 50 years later and hasn't aged a day, but it's totally him. Like,
but that was in the comics, so...
and in real life. Oh, no, you're right, because that whole story was in the comic. We just saw it play out. Yeah, you're right.
So, like, I have a feeling that it's going to possibly... I forgot what this term was. It's the same type of thing that Slender Man is, where it's like the manifestations of fear, come to reality.
Because it's real because you believe that it's real.
Yeah, so if the show is going in that direction, which I think it is, that's something interesting. Whether or not the show can tackle it in a way that doesn't just feel like it's beating you over the head with a bowling pin.
Or does it feel like a really badly done subpar creepypasta series?
I don't know of any of them. The only creepypasta thing that I've ever heard of was a thing called Marble Hornets. Mm-hmm. Which was sort of like a Blair Witchy type web series. I don't know. I never watched it, but I did hear people say good things about it.
I think I saw that at some point.
Okay.
It was one of those things where it was like well shot, but didn't really have great acting to pull it off.
I will say that all the stuff about the clowns fucking was pretty hilarious.
But
I can definitely see. Well, yeah, I can definitely see what they're trying to tackle because she's a lesbian and this is penetrative sex and all that kind of stuff.
Because that's the only reason why women would be lesbians, don't you know? It's just because they're afraid of that dick. I really think that it's more of the drill dick rape scene from Hotel was so controversial and so shocking to a lot of people, and even I thought that scene was actually very well done and one of the best moments in the Hotel season. And
never returned to it.
Yeah, they never returned to it, but Leo actually did. I don't know what the actor's name is, but I always call him Leo from he played a character named Leo on Veronica Mars, so that's what I know him as. But he did like a phenomenal job performing in that scene, and I never would have expected that from him. But it really feels like they're trying to capitalize on like, oh, you remember how like that worked so well in that context and was so terrifying in that context. We'll put it in this one, so like even if you're not scared of clowns, like it'll be really scary. But they don't put nearly as much care or effort or interest or construction into that scene. Like it does not work at all.
Yeah, I guess the only way that it works is if you're somebody who's afraid of clowns, but like, okay, so I have a confession to make because this definitely puts me at odds with most people. So I went to the circus at a really, really young age. I think I was like 4 or 5. Went to the Barnum and Bailey. Unfortunately, it doesn't exist anymore. But it was great. And I loved every aspect of it. I loved the stuff with the lions, the stuff with the elephants. But I also really liked the stuff with the clowns.
The clowns are so good at that circus. I saw them once when I was 7. And I still remember this brilliant stunt they did where they had this diagonal tightrope where like one end was on the ground and one end was up on like a telephone pole. And they had a clown on a motorcycle go down the tightrope and then flipped and then rode back up the tightrope upside down on a motorcycle.
I saw that one too.
That's brilliant, right? Like, how do you do that in real life? Like that's
so like that's my experience with clowns. I get people watched it and all that kind of stuff, but like, you know, when you have that experience with clowns, it's like really hard to like kind of like separate yourself from that. You know, when I was in kindergarten, I dressed up like a clown for Halloween. Not a scary clown or anything like that. It was just a clown. I liked clowns. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get it. I get that is a fear that people have. But, like, honestly, it's just... I think part of it is the fact that it's an exaggerated emotion. You know, clowns portray an exaggerated emotion. So I think that's a bit unsettling to some people. I also think... stuff with John Wayne Gacy and I think there are other killer clowns that actually existed, but John Wayne Gacy is like the only one that I like really know of. But I mean, other than that, you have characters in comic books, you know, Joker,
My first experience with clowns actually, because I saw that circus when I was about 7, so it was older. But my first time seeing clowns in like media was the clowns in Dumbo.
they were kind of dicks in that movie.
They were
right?
total dicks in that movie. You know, it's like, oh great, you know, animal abusers. But that didn't really, as many times as I saw Dumbo, and even saw that in the Disney's Villainous Revenge game, which definitely left a lot of other like traumatizing moments to my childhood psyche. Even though like I would be afraid of those clowns, and I'd be like, dude, clowns are animal abusers. What the fuck? But I didn't really think like clowns were. I just thought those clowns were. You know, it's one of those things where like with the whole like real clowns are scary, and I'm not talking about a phobia. I'm talking about just a general concept. You know, the same way that people think like giant spiders are scary, even if they don't have like arachnophobia, you know?
Well, yeah. I also think like certain things like you saw Capturing the Freedmans. There was like, you know, one of the guys was one of those traveling clown people, and there was also hints that he, you know, was also a pedophile with the whole like family and stuff like that. Sorry, kind of spoilers for Capturing the Freedmans, but not really. The film is actually really fascinating, but like very unsettling because it does talk about like pedophilia and stuff. But I think stuff like that can also correlate to people's like fear and discomfort around clowns and stuff.
But here's one of my biggest problems. They already tackled the idea of the terrifying clown much better and in a much more sophisticated way than they're doing in this season with Twisty in Freak Show, and then somewhat fortunately kind of killed him off before they could really ruin his character. But it was this thing of like, he's scary and he does scary things, but he also, you know, sort of has mental problems. And that's actually something I've seen a lot too. There's an episode of Criminal Minds that's almost exactly like that, where there's a serial killer who, or no, it's not a serial killer. One of the characters on the show has like a reoccurring story arc about saving these little kids whose parents were murdered in their house, and like he sends them like Christmas cards and all this stuff, but they think he's also the person who's sending them like childhood toys and like reminders of their parents' death. And it turns out that the person who had been doing that, who had been like, you know, they were worried was going to stalk them or kill them or something, was a clown who had mental problems, who followed them home from the circus to play with them. And when their parents saw that he was in the house and like they scared him, and he accidentally murdered the shit out of them with an axe. Like it was one of their worst written stories. I'm just like, excuse you? But in American Horror Story, they pull it off a lot better. You know, he has mental problems. He has like the actual physical problems. So he's one of those like sort of gentle giant kind of characters, except for like really creepy and fucked up. They made him actually a really interesting, compelling character, and then killed him off before they could ruin it. And now they're trying to do like a whole season without any of the stuff that made him interesting.
Well, one thing that I have heard about American Horror Story is Ryan Murphy has said since season 4, possibly before season 4, but like the last time I remember, he essentially said that all the seasons are connected.
Yeah, no, they've definitely been like trying to push that until like Twisty actually did exist in this world and whatever. I really couldn't care less about the whole American Horror Story cinematic universe bullshit. Like,
well,
whatever.
Yeah, I mean,
it doesn't make it any better.
The first time they did that was in season 4. Mm-hmm. Where they brought back Pepper, yeah, from season 2. And they've kind of sprinkled little bits of hints in each season to show that they're like connected, but like part of me really is not fond of that because I think the show worked better as standalone seasons. Honestly, given how everything seems to sort of fall apart after their winter break. In every season, I think they should just split their seasons up into 2 different storylines to maybe just wrap things up a little bit more. Because I think that each season kind of gets a little long and then they're not really sure of what to do. And then they just kind of wrap things up without a lot of cohesion. I mean, the first season definitely had its cohesion because, well, you have to try harder when your show is just coming out.
Yeah.
And the second season is their best season by a long shot.
And across the board from the beginning to the end of the season.
Yeah, I mean, it's just fascinating. And that's why I recommended it to you in the beginning. And I don't know. It's really frustrating because, like, we get so few horror stuff nowadays. I mean, this has been a particularly good year for horror films.
Has it?
Yeah.
American horror.
Yeah, American horror films. We have Get Out.
Which, I mean, for me personally, it's hard for me to put that in the horror category. But okay, sure.
I mean, for me personally, that's more of a black comedy.
Yeah, exactly.
And by black comedy, I'm not talking about like Tyler Perry and stuff like that.
Dark comedy, whatever.
Yeah. But sorry, that was a bad joke. And there are a couple more. I'm interested in watching it, but I'm kind of just holding back on it a little bit just because, you know, Mother's coming out next week and I kind of want to just set my mind.
Any other horror this year?
I think we did. I'm sorry.
You saw It Comes at Night.
Yeah. It Comes at Night.
That fares, but
It Comes at Night is a really good movie. The only problem is its title is such a misnomer that you will most likely come out of that movie just going like, nothing came at night. What the fuck? Why is this movie called that? Which is kind of like how I felt like coming out of that movie. It is still like really interesting and unsettling and all that kind of stuff. The budget was kind of like, you spent that much money on what again? Yeah, it seems like a movie that could have been
their crew.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, we should definitely talk about that at some point.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah,
but getting back to your point, I mean, the only horror movie I saw this year, really, I think, was Raw, which was French. And then, I mean, there are some decent horror movies that have come out recently, like The Witch, you know, The Vivitch, whatever, which you and I have butted heads on, but we both agree is a really good actual horror film, sort of a thing. I don't think it's scary, but, you know, I think that it belongs in that genre, sure. And then there's some that have gotten, like, really good acclaim that I haven't seen yet, like, Girl Walks Home Alone at Night.
Yeah.
Is that American?
No, that's Iranian.
Oh, then never mind. Whoops. But really, like, my concept of what horror is, and especially, like, horror as its best, does not exist in America almost at all anymore. Because I don't consider things like slasher films, you know, Final Destination, Saw, like, somewhat comical torture porn. I don't really consider any of that to be, like, horror, necessarily.
Yeah, we're definitely going to do a podcast coming up in the October season about that very topic, just because I honestly think that... I guess
America does have, like, a lot of those, like, supernatural kind of horror movies, which I think some supernatural horror is very effective, but I think a lot of the ones that come out in America are crap.
Well,
and I don't want to sound like a snob, but, like, okay, this is part of the reason why I think this. Like, this is just going to be a part of American horror identity to me. There was a time when I wasn't, like, watching a lot of these movies, but I was seeing tons of trailers where every American horror movie had to feature a childhood sing-song lullaby of some sort, to the point where it got to be, like, really comical. There was one, I remember a lot of details about it, but I couldn't tell you if it's a good movie or not because I didn't see it. But the trailer seriously tries to make Old MacDonald Had a Farm sound scary and creepy. They have, like, the little girl with, like, the psycho violin background going, Old MacDonald had a farm. But you can't do it. Like, it doesn't matter what you do. That's not going to be scary. You know, and there seems to be, like, this really odd notion in a lot of American horror that, like, the reason why I don't think that it's very effective is because it tends to be about people who are stupid and do stupid things. Like, to the point, like, even Scary Movie does, like, the little joke where it's, like, one direction says death and one direction says safety, and, like, they go the way of death. Like, you know, that's a trope of the American horror genre.
Scary Movie is, like, a spoof of all
But
this.
It's a spoof of the genre.
Yeah.
You know, that's, like, a trope in the genre. You know, even Cabin in the Woods is kind of essentially about that trope. And that's something that doesn't inspire fear in a lot of Americans, or, like, not even a lot of Americans, but a lot of viewers. You know, when you look at a lot of horror movies in different countries, like, particularly, like, French horror, one of the things that's really terrifying is when you see somebody do everything that they should be doing and make all of the right calls and still end up in danger and still have to face, you know, and usually a lot of the stuff in horror tends to be a metaphor for some sort of emotional turmoil or some sort of actual fear that they have. You know, like, for example, the Babadook is a physical manifestation of her internalized hatred and fear of her son. You know, that's such a taboo topic that almost no movies in cinema around the world really will talk about. And that's definitely something that, like, you can't actually talk about socially. Like, if you're a mom having those kind of issues with your kid, there's nowhere you can really go to talk about that. You know, even postpartum depression is still a very taboo topic to talk about. Not that, but something like that's a little bit more understandable because that's still considered, like, medical. Anyway, my point is that, like you said, there's not a lot of, like, really good, actually scary horror in American media, and I feel like American Horror Story is such an odd bag because they have a record of, like, doing really good horror. Like, Asylum is a lot about, you know, it's very character driven. A lot of it is, you know, people doing the right thing. They're not, like, stupid people. It's not like watching stupid people get killed in funny ways. It's very much the terror of being victimized. That's really fascinating. But then on the other hand, you have, ooh, clowns are creepy, kind of, and Trump is scary. We'll mush them together, and scary, right? Like,
yeah, well, one of the things that I heard after the 2016 election, when TV execs were getting together, I heard something from a Hollywood insider, like somebody who was, like, behind, like, TV and stuff, say that when they had all these meetings, like, pretty much everybody was like, let's make something about Trump. And, like, I get that it's on everybody's mind, and there are interesting things that you can take away from that. The only thing is, I feel that currently there's a little bit too much in the media, which is definitely something that you can kind of tackle. But, like, when everything is one-sided, it doesn't bring anything new. It doesn't. It just feels lazy to, you know, not address these issues in any way that isn't completely one-sided.
Yeah, and I'm not talking about American Horror Story doing this, but I'm not necessarily against the idea of doing, you know, artwork or TV shows or movies that are about Trump, or, like, even horror that's about Trump. I do think that it loses a lot of its edge when you specifically use Trump's name and face, though, instead of using some sort of allegory to give it a more universal quality.
And that's one of the things that I've loved about horror for, like, the longest time is, like, usually there's a separation with the allegory. It's not, like, specific people and specific events. Granted, sometimes they correlate, or sometimes it might take place in, like, Cabrini Green, like the Candyman film. I know it was a series, but I only consider the first film, like, part of it. You know, so there are ways that horror can kind of be socially relevant, but the more explicit you are, the more alienated some viewers are going to have. I'm sure, I haven't seen it, but I'm sure there are plenty of people who voted for Trump and people who supported this whole thing are furious at this season, which I'm okay with. You know, like this whole idea that like you want to escape from like politics and stuff like that in media, like that doesn't really exist. You just don't want to pay attention to it if you're one of those people, because it exists in all media, whether it's explicit or just influence is the people, you know, like it yeah.
Well, I also think a big part of the reason why, if it was more allegorical, it could be a lot more effective, is that one of the problems with this setup of making it explicitly about the 2016 election, explicitly about Trump, and explicitly about the household of, you know, a white privileged family, is you're taking a lot of the personal consequence out of it. They're not going to be deported. That's not a thing that's going to happen. They're not going to be attacked for the color of their skin. They're not going to be told, like, your life doesn't matter. In this context, primarily because they're very wealthy, they're not going to really face, like, you know, fear about the police. Like, we even obviously saw that in that episode. There's a point where they call the cops and, you know, ambulance shows up and all this stuff. If you made it more allegorical, you could have a more personal message that a lot of people could relate to, because you could have primary characters who theoretically are undergoing the consequences of something that is evocative of the Trump administration without specifically saying it's this one thing. And when you make it allegorical, it can be related to more people across the political spectrum and across country and across time. You know, it's not like Trump is the only leader in the world and in history who's like this. You know what I mean? And also, when you make it more allegorical and when you make it a lot less specific, it won't... There's so little idea, like there's so little of a concept in our political climate right now of actually having a discussion or trying to make people think, how do you say, constructively about their ideas or about their morals or about their politics. And when you take something and you make it allegorical, you have a much better chance of making somebody on the other side understand what your views are on a particular subject matter. And that's just something that as soon as you say it's explicitly about Trump and explicitly about the election and explicitly about this kind of household, you know, and it's specifically about how Trump and his supporters are all evil clowns, you're immediately taking all of that off the table, and all of that is just like a non-option. And I don't know why you would need to do that. That just seems like very weak creative choices.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to watch more of this season, just because, unfortunately, this, like we said before, this is the first piece of media that is sort of tackling this period of time.
Not true. It's just the first one we're seeing.
What else has tackled it?
There was a show that was already being advertised to come out. I think it was going to start coming out about a month before the election actually happened. That was essentially about what if Trump won the election. But in that case, it wasn't specifically Trump. It was kind of like how South Park has Mr. Garrison play the role of Trump. They had like an imaginary character like acting like Trump.
Yeah, was it called Graves?
I think it might have been, yeah. I think that might be it.
Yeah, with Nick Nolte.
But I have no idea. I didn't see it, obviously, but like I saw a lot of trailers for it before the election happened.
Yeah, but like as far as like explicitly talking about Trump and all this kind of stuff, like I was actually kind of shocked that we didn't get a documentary before this show came out. But I guess
that's because a lot of information is still being uncovered right now.
Yeah, which will be interesting to see like how documentaries tackle it, because what I would prefer is something that's journalistic and actually, you know, presents more than just the two sides, because trust me, there was more than two sides to the story. And, all we hear is either, these liberal crybabies or like, these horrible monsters, which is sort of the hyperbolic idea that this show is trying to present.
Mm-hmm. There's not a whole lot of journalism, like journalistic quality to journalism anymore, though.
Yeah, well, when we started jailing journalists, that changed. That was something that we didn't do before. And, that's happened in the last 10 years. Yeah, I mean, it's a really scary time for like a lot of things. And while I would invite people to tackle these ideas in media, I do think that there does need to be a certain element of tact. And I'm not sure if this show is actually doing that.
And here's the interesting thing. We've seen evidence that can happen. We've seen footage of politicians going into a room full of conservatives and people who voted for Trump or who were interested in voting for Trump and pitching them the idea of a single-payer health system without using that name, without using ideas like, Medicare for all, Obamacare, any of these like politically inclined terms for it, but pitching just the idea of everybody is covered. You don't have to worry about going to the hospital if you're injured or if you fall sick, and everybody, having the same opportunity to healthcare. They support it like that, and there's not a lot of effort made to do that across the political spectrum on either side. It's all about, but my side is right and your side is wrong, and that's all there is to it, and that just leads to regressive politics because nobody wants to move anywhere.
Well, yeah, and
but
the fact
it does work. It can work. People can be receptive when you're not when you're not uber aggressive about your political name and your political identity over policy.
Yeah, and this whole concept of this...
And let me say, shows like this are not helping.
Yeah,
based on this first episode. Maybe it will develop somewhere, maybe I'll eat my own words, but based on this one episode, it's definitely not helping anybody.
It definitely feels like it's catering to a particular side, i.e., what is it, the 87 million or whatever?
The 67 million, I
67
think.
Million people who voted for Hillary Clinton, and, you take that and then you shrink the number to people who would actually watch a show like this. And, I don't think it's a smart move business-wise to do something like this. But, I mean, we'll see. I wouldn't be surprised if the show gets canceled after this season. But I don't know. I mean, it is possible with it coming out and, people having a newfound interest in clowns and horror that this will hit off. But I don't know. It doesn't really seem inspired. It seems like they didn't know what to do, so they just said, oh, what's the only thing that was on our mind like this past year? The election. So that's what we're going to talk about.
And to be fair, the standpoint of this is the most terrifying thing I could think of happening is not a bad idea to come from. I just don't think they have the sophistication or the creative ability to pull it off very well. Especially after this first episode. Especially based off of their trailers and their promotional media. Especially since they have always had outstanding promotions. Outstanding. Even for seasons that I've hated, even for elements that I despise. And even though most of the time the promotional work is something you never ever see and is never incorporated, it's always exceptional until this one, where it just looked like ass and sounded like ass. And really made me apprehensive about the season. And honestly, it was based on this first episode, it was a pretty accurate representation of what to expect.
So what did you think of the first episode of American Horror Story? Let us know in the comments below, and if you would like us to cover more of this season, let us know what issues you would like us to pay attention to or address in our next video or videos.
Yeah. I'm not going to say, like, let's definitely do one every episode or anything.
Yeah, that might be a little much.
Yeah, no. Maybe at most one at the winter break and then one at the end of the season.
Yeah.
Unless there's like a really interesting specific topic that gets brought up, but...
Yeah, that's one of the things that does kind of separate our channel from like a lot of other people is like I'm more interested in the topics that things present as opposed to just talking about like episode by episode. And like if you wanted like an episode breakdown, like I'm just not going to do it. I can give you tons of recommendations of other podcasts that do that, but
and probably do it better than we could anyway.
Like, yeah, and I don't want to emulate somebody else's style. Mm-hmm. You know, I'd rather talk about the issues than, you know, talk about, you know, like actually breaking down.
We did do a breakdown of Terminator.
Yes, we did. But
that's not like a general Alexa film style.
Yeah, we vary sometimes with our style, but I think that you know, at least for me, it's fun to talk about.
For way too long, but that's because we like to break everything down and like really talk about what the topic is.
Yeah. So.
Unless somebody mentions the DCU, in which case, severe left turn.
Oh, believe you me, we are going to talk about the DCU very soon.
God, right. Not right now.
Yeah.
For the love of God.
So if you want to support us, we have a Patreon webpage, and if you go on there, donate $1. It would be great, especially since like we do go to the movies pretty often, and yeah, we put our hard-earned dollars and then, you know, review them. So if you like what we do, consider giving us $1, or, you know, maybe watch that 30-second ad before the video.
And to end on a more positive note, if you're looking for a television program this year that addresses a lot of fears of this administration and the American political climate and any, you know, notions of oppressive government and how that affects people on a personal level, please watch The Handmaid's Tale. Yeah, that is a brilliant show, and I personally think it addressed every element brought up in the book better than the book did, like a lot better. Which is a compliment. The book's very good too. But I don't want to be like a negative Nancy all the time and just be like, well, this is shit. A much better version of this already came out this year. And if you want to support really, really good artistic political expression and just a really fantastic show, please watch Handmaid's Tale. It's on Hulu. It's Hulu original series. And it definitely deserves your views and your thoughts and your comments and podcasts and anything else you might want to put out there.
And I haven't seen this yet, but I know The Man in the High Castle is a show that kind of illustrates sort of an extreme side of our current political situation where like Nazis took over like the US and all that kind of stuff.
That's true. I've been wanting to watch that program. I haven't seen it, but it looks interesting.
Yeah, that's currently on Amazon Prime. So if you have that, you can watch it on there as well.
Yeah, and if you're interested in maybe looking at media that's trying to be more constructive about having political dialogue across the spectrum, check out the movie Thank You for Smoking. That is a great political social commentary that I personally think is probably really underrated. That's specifically about the protagonist is somebody who lobbies for the tobacco industry to, you know, fight against laws to to protect people from the dangers of smoking, sort of thing. And he's the person you're supposed to identify with, you know, and he's coming from like this total asshole sort of position. But it's a really interesting movie that talks about like how to have real political discussion.
All right. Thanks for listening.